Tim Linder here. So let's take what we know about the brush tool a little bit farther. We've investigated some of these options up at the top, but there are even more in the brushes panel. So if I were to choose Window, Brush, or click on this little button right here, I can open up my brushes panel. I'm going to tear this off right now to kind of take a look at some of these. I'm going to close this one up and move this over a little bit so that we kind of see a little bit more in depth. And so if I've got any one of these brush presets that I choose from, you'll notice that some of these options that I'm looking at over here on the in the brushes panel change. And so this is where you might change things, like when I was painting with the leaves earlier in that other tutorial, and I'm painting and I'm not just getting a red color. Some are orange, some are pink. These things seem to be scattered about as I move through here, and that's where I can change some of these options in my brushes panel. So if I wanted to change around, let's say, the brush tip shape, this very top one, and notice I've got spacing. As I spread the spacing out, the spacing of these leaves becomes very far apart. If I scale them in, it bunches them up together. I can also go to shape dynamics, and I can change things like the size jitter, so the amount of randomness of size. I can scale that up and down. I can change the angle jitter if I wanted to, the randomness of the rotation. I could go to scattering, and I can change how far apart these are scattered, so I can bunch them all closer together. As far as the scattering setting goes, I can go up to brush tip shape and space them out a little bit further. So now as I paint with my brush, they're kind of put all in bunches together a little bit closer, or a little more in line. So this is some of the options that you can change from. So even if I were to go, I'm going to choose Command Delete here and fill with white. I'm going to go back up and grab a normal paintbrush here from my paintbrush settings, and you'll see that there are some spacing issues. If I wanted to drag my spacing out, I can create a brush that will give me kind of a dotted line here. I'm scaling down the size of my brush with the brackets next to the P on the keyboard, so I can paint with a brush like this. I can also go in and change some of my settings. So let's say that I wanted to change, let's say, the color dynamics, and I wanted a foreground to background jitter, so a jitter or a randomness between the foreground, which is red, and the background, which is blue. And as I paint now, notice there is a randomness between those two colors. You can change and drag the hue slider way up there as well for the randomness of the hue, and I can get to really adjust that the randomness there as well. So there are a lot of options that you can go through and that you can make changes to, even including the orientation of the brush, so you can get more of a let's say a calligraphy style brush. If you wanted to change the size of it here and the angle, get a little bit larger of a brush there. So now as I'm painting, I get this kind of calligraphy brush that's painting these dots. So there are a lot of options that you can choose from. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory with regard to the nomenclature of what they name these options, but you can click and choose them. Another thing that we'll talk about briefly in another tutorial is how you might be able to select one of these preset settings and change around the, let's say, color dynamics that are associated with the pen pressure if you're using a Wacom tablet. So the harder I press, the larger the brush gets, or the more colors, the more they change from one to the other. So I could change my jitter way down, and now as I press my brush here, I'm also going to want to probably change down the hue jitter as well. As I press my brush, the more closer I get to red. So the lighter I touch, I have my background color, and the harder I touch on my tablet, I go to the foreground color. So I turned the foreground and background jitter down, I turned the randomness of the hue down, and I turned the difference between the foreground and background to be associated with the pen pressure. So these are just some of the options, and again, you can click on this little lock button and you can lock these if you want. You can also go here, and once you enjoy or once you like a brush that you've created, you could always click on this new brush preset, and it will create that new brush preset down in your panel for you to go back to if you wish to keep it.